just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. And today I'm on Dharawal land out here in southern, about 2 hours from Sydney, south. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. My name is Mary Hoang. I'm the founder and head psychologist of the Indigo project. And I'm joined today by Ellie and Eunice, incredible psychotherapists at the Indigo project. And we are an online therapy studio. We've been around for about 10 years. We've gone through many evolutions, many different shifts of our identity, from how we look to, some of the core philosophies. So, I call Indigo my baby because she's grown through these years. She's been kept me up, got me into gave me a lot of shit in the beginning. It's been quite a big journey, and I think I've seen myself grow and change quite a lot over the last 10 years as well. And grappled quite a lot with my own identity and who I am. And I was speaking to the girls earlier and saying that this conversation is relevant no matter what stage of life you're at. I recently turned 40 and had a major crisis in my life of thinking, what am I doing with my life? Do I even want to be a psychologist anymore? And last year, even asked the question, do I want to continue with the Indigo project, something that I've loved and built over 10 years, but also was really difficult for me to find a way to find balance in my life because I was putting other people first and often, just burning myself out a lot. So identity is has been a huge question for me in the past. I would say probably particularly the last 3 years after my father passed away, and caused me to ask myself a lot of questions. What do I want to live? Am I enjoying what I'm doing for work? What am I doing with my life? What gets me out of bed? What brings me joy? And I think if anyone here understands and has gone through grief themselves, as we all do, and I think we are going through collectively, we are going to be asking ourselves a lot of, you do get into that place where you ask yourself a lot of questions. And right now, if you can, identity and motivation seem like very big topics, but I think if we come together and we can relate to sometimes these periods in our lives where we feel stuck, we feel lost, we feel unsure of who we are. What am I doing here? What is the point? We find it hard to connect with what it means to live authentically, because that's the catchphrase now, is like, live your life authentically. Like, what the hell does that mean for me? How do I live in line with my values? What are my values? It's a mess. But hopefully at the end of today's session, you'll feel a little less messy. We're going to give you lots of tools and strategies today. We're going to be sending out some worksheets as a wrap from today's session as well, so that you can really spend a bit of time thinking about what it means for you to really discover who you are. So welcome again to Ellie and to Eunice. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are all a bundle of nerves. Also, my heart goes out to anyone who is affected by the floods. If you guys have the opportunity to donate to any relief funds, we are at the Indigo project, and we do encourage our community to do so too. So Ellie and Eunice, thank you for being here. I'm going to go straight to the heart of why this topic is really important to you, why you're passionate about it, why identity, why motivation, like what makes you want to grab this topic and really bring it into people's lives, and why is it important? So maybe Ellie, give us a heads up.
All right. Well, I don't know how to follow that introduction, but hi everyone. I suppose just kind of from my own experience in my own life, I went through a lot by the age of 10 in different ways, and kind of my living situation, family, grief. you name it. And I suppose by the time I was grappling with adulthood, I was going through this big identity. Who am I? Feeling quite boxed in by what I'd experienced. And I know that's something quite common for people that I'm working with as well, you know, things happening not by choice and having to really wrestle with that when they're things that we don't want to happen and are really awful and really painful. So I suppose for me, the big why is my experience of going through that and using that as a bit of a reckoning rather than something happening to me. In saying that, that's a nice kind of Disney version of it. It definitely involves a lot of digging, a lot of pain, things like that. But I feel like identity for me has been my savior in a way of making sense of everything.
So, I mean, a lot of people are going to be relating to the fact that they're asking themselves these questions because maybe the trajectory of their lives was maybe like a bullet train going in a certain direction, and maybe something happened that made them stop and think about, you know, is this really what I want to do? Yeah, it makes complete sense. And Eunice, how about you?
Yeah, just wanted to follow up, follow on with what you said. I think, COVID last past 2, 3 years has been a huge sort of that bullet train stopping to really sort of get us to reflect and have a think about, what are we doing? What's working and what's not working and what should we change? And I think the reason why I'm so passionate about identity and motivation is because it's so crucial and to keep me going. Without knowing or figuring out what I like to do or what drives me, it's really difficult for me to keep going and to keep doing what I do. And in terms of identity, I've really had to take a leap to really figure out what makes me me in a sense. I'll give an example. Growing up, I'm a very sort of self-conscious person. Would be very nervous and anxious. And one day, my best friend asked me if I would join him on a kickboxing class. And despite me feeling very self-conscious and being in the class, and there was mirrors everywhere, so it's literally I'm looking at myself when I'm making all of those moves. I continued on, and it was great because after that first lesson, I felt strong and alive and very confident. And originally, what it was meant to just be like a stress relief, and it turned out to be the best thing that I've ever done. So yeah, like I took a lot away from just trying and just getting over my nerves and trying something that I've never done, and yeah. And another reason why identity is so important to me is because my identity was stripped away in 2020 when COVID first hit. I had a sports injury which prevented me from doing what I loved, which is kickboxing. So it was a huge blow for me. I lost I lost who I was. I couldn't do anything about it. And it took me a long time before I was able to really heal and accept that I couldn't do that anymore. So yeah, identity is something that I resonate with very strongly.
I mean, thanks for sharing that with us, because I think what it highlights is that people, maybe, you know, our clients don't necessarily come in to see us because they recognize that there may be a pathway to working with questions around their identity. But, you know, some of the things that you guys have spoken about and already spoken about, people might come in because they're feeling stuck or lost. I've worked with a lot of athletes over the years who have had really high profile careers who have ended very suddenly because of career, who've been then really down this tunnel of depression because everything that they once knew was no more. And that's a huge symptom of the signs of, well, you know, that it's what we've all been going through globally in the past few years. What we thought we knew is not what it is. And I think when we're forced to stop in this way, I have never had so many people ask questions about what they're doing with their lives, and the amount of anxiety that produces is so intense. So sometimes people are coming in because like, I'm just experiencing so much anxiety right now. And to be real, I think a lot of that anxiety was present pre-COVID as well. It's just that we kept ourselves so busy that we didn't even realize that we were unaligned in our lives. So there are so many reasons why people can want to, leads them to do this identity, value, motivation work, because of a big circumstance that has changed the trajectory of their lives, the global pandemic, but also when nothing is going on in their lives and they're forced to be in their bodies feeling uncomfortable because maybe they've been living their lives for a long time, maybe living out the values of someone else, their family, their friends, their, organizations they're a part of, that they've aligned their identity to, that they've never really questioned. So I'm really curious, because I think it makes this more relevant for those that are watching. Like, why are people coming to you that leads them to do this type of identity work? And if anyone in the audience has any reasons why particularly that they've come tonight, that they want to share, and that we can bring into the conversation and answer any questions, please let us know. Eunice or Ellie.
All right, I can go. So a lot of my clients sort of come through, as you said, Mary, not necessarily, they may not necessarily come in and specifically say, hey, like, I want to explore identity. They might come in with some stuff, I don't know, such as relationships, or, feeling really unmotivated. And then as we sort of start to unravel, like, what's going on, and it sort of points a little bit towards, I feel a bit lost, like, I don't really feel like, for example, this job aligns with my values, or even, like, I initially wanted to do architect, but then I went into engineering. So it's a common theme that I'm starting to notice within my clients, because when we are doing something that doesn't necessarily align with our own personal values, or our personality, or sort of what our interests are, it's very hard to keep ourselves motivated, or it's even like there's like this internal conflict going on. It's like, okay, like, I feel really sort of wrong doing this, because it's sort of like, I'll give an example. I have a client who works in marketing, and she's been in it for a while, but it doesn't really align with who she is. She wants to go into a helping profession. She wants to make an impact on people's lives, whereas her job was sort of the opposite for her. It was more about, like, getting people to click on ads, getting people to sort of to very number driven, very factual driven. So we explored that a little bit, and I was like, what's something that you would like to do? What's something that could help you reconnect to that part of yourself, that some of your interests? And then she's like, oh, okay, I think I might look into plants again, because that was something that she was passionate about. She even looked into a counseling course, or a psychology course, which was sort of what aligned with her personally. So yeah, it's quite. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But it's quite significant that people come in with certain things, and then it ultimately sort of points to identity.
Yeah. How about you, Ellie? What do you kind of see as, like, common reasons why people come in that would lead you to do some identity work with them?
I mean, look, I think I echo both of your sentiments. I think one of the big things of COVID has been that shift, and we hear a lot about that in the media, and we hear that everywhere. But I think the biggest thing that's coming through for clients with me is that grief and loss, and that could be COVID related, like loss of a job, or loss of time is a big one too. And thinking about the concept of time, when we were all forced to think about it, where we're like, we're actually kind of losing time, and that's really, really hard to deal with. And that could kind of pose a bit of a reconsideration of where you're going, but also a lot with grief and loss of people, relationships, a lot of COVID breakups that occurred. And so these things that I suppose, like I was saying before, kind of like in my own life, happen to people. And then that starts to go, okay, well, now that this has happened and I'm trying to swim through this murky mess, how can I do that? And what does that mean about me? And I suppose also thinking about just the very nature of grief and loss, that, you know, you get very existential and start to think like, well, if I'm only here for this amount of time, or if my loved ones are only here for this amount of time, you know, that kind of dialogue comes into it too, which then leads to identity work as well.
It's interesting with grief and loss, because what it does is, you know, it and grief, and we're not just talking about the loss of life, you know, someone that you love. We're talking about just the change in, you know, how you live, work, play, loss of dreams, jobs, etc., relationships. You know, it's not just about like it's not just about the loss of the person, but what it does is it brings about these questions, you know, because it makes it feel like all of a sudden life is not never endless and never ending. It allows you to see that there is the scarcity that comes with life. And then you know, because we procrastinate on life because we think life is forever. We think, oh, okay, well, you know, I'll start that new business tomorrow, or I'll do this thing tomorrow, or I'll change this habit tomorrow, or the next week, or the week after, because we don't really kind of get a grapple on the scarcity of time and our lives. And what I was finding really interesting in my circumstance, when I started to go through, like, I guess, a bit of an identity crisis through my experience of grief and loss, was from the external, you know, people would look at my life and say, you know, your life is really great. You're doing this and you've got your own organization and you're living in life with, you know, within your values and all of that sort of stuff. But it didn't feel that way to me anymore. So, you know, I think when anyone that's watching is reflecting upon their lives, I think it's very easy to say, but you know, my life is not as hard as this other person, and you know, I've got it pretty good. I've worked so hard to get to where I was, but it was this feeling within my body that it was like, this is not making me happy anymore. And I think it was really hard for me to face that situation. You know, like, maybe we should even go backwards and, you know, what when we're talking about identity, like, what is it? Like, Ellie, like, how do you even, like, if someone's like, well, what are we doing here and talking about identity? Like, how do you describe that?
Well, I mean, I think it's such a huge question. Maybe I should have started there, but obviously it's so individual to everyone. But someone I know put it really, really nicely and succinctly, with saying it's what connects us, but it's also what sets you apart. And kind of thinking about those two things as being things that do align with you, and I know that word comes up a lot, but what connects you and what sets you apart, whether it's by choice, whether it's not by choice. That's kind of how I found identity.
So what sets you apart is in from others or from?
Yeah, so what identifies you, and sometimes that is the apartness. So I suppose it's maybe a balance of the connection and the apartness, or maybe sometimes it is when it tips, seesaws a little bit. I'm finding that within the grey, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to encapsulate it. And Eunice, what do you think when you think of identity?
When I think of identity, I think about, you know, what's one thing that defines you? What makes you different? I guess a little bit similar to what Ellie said. What are your strengths? What makes you unique? I think a lot of the times in my client work, when they say, when someone comes in and sort of feeling a bit depressed with about perhaps bullying in a sense, they would feel really low about themselves, their self-esteem especially. And then, you know, something that I love to do with clients is that, you know, like, I would get them to really sort of think about, you know, what are your strengths, what makes you unique, you know, and what are some of the things that comes to mind, or words, when you think about yourself from other people and the world. So that's identity for me.
I know I talk about death a lot because I am a little bit death obsessed, and it is the last segment or our finding alignment session, because I seem to talk about death at every single session. I don't know. I just how to get it in.
Yeah.
But identity makes me think about also like what people would say about you at your eulogy, you know, like if you actually stop, I mean, and actually think, what maybe what would I like people to say about me? What do I think people would say? What like I think that really brings to the surface perhaps who you really are at the core, and what you maybe want to look back on your life, because we're often looking forward, trajectory, we're looking forward, looking forward, looking forward. And sometimes it's really hard to look forward, because when we look forward, what I find is that people get their shoulds and their I can'ts in the way. So they're like, oh, I don't have enough education. I can't do this. Like, I need to study more. I need to, you know, I'm not high enough in the ladder. Like, I need to change my whole life. And so that often stops people from changing their lives because they put all the obstacles in the way. But I find that when we go the other way and we're like, okay, well, you're at the end of your life now and you're looking back. So everything's been done and it's been achieved and all of that kind of stuff. Like, to be able to reminisce upon that, it doesn't feel as, oh my gosh, I need to do all these things and I'm not there yet. I think it allows people to have a greater sense of not only imagination, but feel a little bit more relaxed, and that it's maybe a bit more closer than they think. Because what makes changing our lives feel so far is that there's often a gap in motivation, and there's often a gap in self-confidence, which, you know, we'll talk about. But if we're looking back, I think it tends to sort of take that away. So, you know, it isn't, if you're inclined like me to think like this, it may be a really interesting exercise to think about it, because it also helps us to remember, you know, our life is scarce and we do have a limited amount of time to really explore the really depths of who we are in our relationships. And we don't really want to, I mean, the biggest fear for me is that I'll be like sleepwalking through my life, where I'm in the same routine patterns over and over again. And that my hugest fear, is that I'll be like, you know, a few years ago, I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, it's great for everyone, but is it actually great for me? Helping a lot of people, but is it actually helping me feel like I'm connected to myself?
I also wonder, Mary, kind of if, and this is just off the top of my head because I've never done that exercise with anyone, but I'd be intrigued to see if it does get to the core of who you actually are. And I highly doubt anyone will go, well, at the eulogy, I want them to say that I got this award, I did this, you know, I mean, hey, if that's your thing, go for it. But I think it would strip back a lot and go, you know what, I would just want them to say I'm a really kind, generous person. And that would possibly reevaluate some of the stuff you're doing.
I think it would simplify things, because you probably wouldn't have this long list of things where you're like, I've got to do this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
You know, and then maybe it kind of hones in on what's really important. Because if I was to think about, like, you know, I want people to say she made some really incredible, you know, like, you know, there was this, I really want to explore my artistic side, which is something that I've been dabbling in. But I was like, oh, that would be really cool if, like, there was something that people spoke about it at my funeral. Oh, well, you know, we'll talk more about death next week. I would really, I think people want to know, because, you know, we can get really heady with this type of stuff. What are people at home? What can they do if they want to explore some of the processes? What are you taking your clients through? You know, if I was to become a client, what can I expect? Because, well, I mean, we're just going to talk about like what I like and what I don't like. And, you know, surely it gets a little bit deeper than that, right?
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, Eunice, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I guess to answer your question, Mary, if what a client would expect from if they were to work with me is that I like to sort of start off my sessions with sort of really saying something that I believe in, which is that I believe we all do things for a reason, because they've served us a function, or, they've sort of given us a lot of things that we wanted. But as our values start to shift and we actually get more experience and wisdom and mature, those things that we're so used to doing might actually hold us back. So I like to really sort of think of my role as guiding clients through those blind spots and sort of really identifying what's holding them back. What can't you can say if they said, oh, this person or this particular thing is holding me back. Okay, so how can we sort of conceptualize that? How can, beyond seeing it as something that you can't do, how can you think of what are the ways that you can do it, or what are the little steps that you can do to get there, and we've just after this, sorry, bit of nerve, sorry. So after that, I would really sort of explore and identify some of the origins of their negative beliefs. Say, oh, like I feel like I can never sort of get up to this level, or like, oh, like I always tell myself that I'm worthless. So I would really sort of dig deep and be like, okay, who told you that? What are some of the origins of this belief or this concept or this value? A lot of the times clients don't really realize that some of the things that they've grown up with is actually sort of holding them back. And then the best part is just, seeing that unravel, seeing them sort of realize and have that light bulb moments like, oh, okay, so I was told not to do this, or, if I did this, this would happen. That's actually the thing that's holding me back. And yeah, it's really, really, really good to sort of see that happen, unfold.
I mean, it's pretty powerful work, because I think when, I notice when people come into therapy, they blame themselves for why they can't move forward. Like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm educated enough, there's all these reasons why they can't. But when we, what you're talking about is getting to the core of the self-beliefs that we hold, which is not always conscious. Because I'm like, yeah, I'm cool. And then like underneath, I'm like, I don't really like myself, or I'm not feeling very confident. And where, to really change, I think, the trajectory of our lives, we need to look at those core beliefs, because otherwise everyone's going to know this, like everyone's going to relate to it. Start a new hobby and you're like, oh yeah, I like this, start jogging,
Exercise,
like 5 days, and you're like, yeah, I'm so good at this, eating healthy, all of that kind of stuff. And then we stop, we lose motivation, we lose that kind of, because self-sabotage comes in, self-criticism comes in, the fear of vulnerability, whatever it is. There's these parts of us, which we spoke about in, the last session around trauma in the body. There's these parts of us that come in and say, hey, you can't. And it does actually stop us. And those parts of us actually serve a purpose in some regard, because it might sound weird, but some of these parts that are stopping you from moving forward are trying to protect you for some reason. And that's really mind-boggling for some people, because you're like, I need to get fit and eat healthy. And like, you're just like, why are you self-sabotaging me? It's because I'm trying to keep you safe. You're like, hey, what? It's deep stuff that we go into therapy. You just like, when people have these penny drop moments when they get to the core of that self-belief and why it's stopping them from doing seemingly really good stuff for them, like meditate and kind to themselves, to go to bed early, to leave work at an appropriate time. It's just like, it's mind-boggling. People get so frustrated and think, oh, I don't have good self-control, I don't have enough will, I don't have enough determination. It's like, constantly beating ourselves up. I just give in too easily, all of that. But it's not where it's at, and I think you brought up a really good point around, where do these beliefs come from? And of course, I think about family, and what talking about your mum and your dad, like how cliche that is, but also how really, really important. If anyone's going to work with me, we can do a lot of family stuff. Ellie, like, what, I mean, you're doing this kind of stuff with your clients too. Is there similarities, different processes that you're taking?
Yeah. I think just as you were talking about, the talk, like the negative self-talk and all the stories, and I can't do this because I'm lazy, or I'm this, or I'm that. And it's interesting watching people deliver these reasons why, and they usually are pointed right at themselves. And I usually use a bit of a metaphor, which, like, stupid metaphor, but it helps. Kind of like with, imagine you're stepping on a hose that you try and turn on. Like obviously nothing's happening because your foot's on it, and like the water's just like piling up and nothing's coming out. So if we can take the foot off a little bit, and just approach it with curiosity, which is the biggest buzzword in psychotherapy, but you know, just being curious about, okay, well, you're not happy in relationship, like what is happy relationship? Where have you gotten that idea? Might come into mum, dad, whoever was going on, you know, if that's relevant, but just being curious around, are we shoulding? Are we, oh, well, I'm not happy at work because I feel like I should be doing this, or I'm actually only doing this job because I should, or, you know, just getting curious around those shoulds and I suppose the pressures. And then I find from there, once we look and unpack the pressures, then we can go, oh, okay, actually, I don't even want to do this. Like, why am I doing this? And then you can go down and, of course, look at the self-beliefs and the core beliefs that are keeping you stuck. But it's interesting watching that revelation of like, my dad wanted me to do that. Like, you know, it's so embedded and it's so like, and I have those moments like weekly. I'm like, why am I doing this thing, or like rushing to do this? I'm like, it's when I was this old, like I was told I had to do this, or, you know, I mean, not everything is linked to that, but it's just interesting once you kind of open it, take your foot off the hose, things that the answers do come.
Family stuff is huge. We could probably do a whole conversation series around like
Definitely.
stuff and how to work through it. I've been working through it like over 10 years in therapy. There's points in my life where I was just like, oh no, I don't want to talk about my parents anymore. You know, I'm pretty sure I've like figured that bit out, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm literally not even at the front door of the, you know, like the place I need to be in. I'm just like standing outside, and I think I've like completed the circuit or something. You know, this is kind of deep work. You know, it does require, personally for me, someone to hold my hand through it, because it was very vulnerable work. When we talk about identity, we don't necessarily think about vulnerability and grief and loss and mum and dad, but it's huge. So, you know, I'm sure everyone wants to be like, well, I'll just do these exercises and then I'm going to find out who I am. But it's not that simple. You know, like, tell us about the role of vulnerability, the role of grief in this type of work, because I imagine it can get a bit hard sometimes to have the courage to ask yourself these questions and maybe have no idea what the answers are.
I also find kind of, you know, when there's a realization of I'm not where I want to be, or my life, sometimes like your life can't reflect what you want right now anyway, you know, and that was a huge thing in COVID. But when you can see that gap, that is often when you might have to let go of some things to begin to move toward what this identity thing is. And that can involve that vulnerability and letting go of some stuff that maybe you don't really want to. It's pretty hard.
Can you give us some examples of what we might need to let go of on this journey? Because
people.
Okay, yep, that's pretty full on.
And that's
Harsh.
can of
True.
But
yes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes boundaries are a lovely word, but they're not always respected, and sometimes you do need to move through letting go of people and relationships, which is really hard.
Eunice, give us the hard bit of doing this type of work, the vulnerability in it, the you know why we might need someone to like hold our hands through this, because if it was possible, I guess we'd all be doing it, and you know, we'd just be living the lives that we want. But it's not, you know, it's not that easy. Like, why do we need someone on this journey, and why does it get hard for your clients?
Yeah, it's because it's definitely very confronting and vulnerable. Like you're literally putting yourself on the spotlight light when you're asking yourself these questions. It's hard because sometimes a lot of my clients who come to me, they would say things like, oh, like I didn't really connect with my previous therapist. My therapist just told me to go exercise and breathe and meditate. So it points to safety. I think it's it's about feeling safe, opening up with your therapist and working on really personal things. I mean, I wouldn't share any of those personal things with just anyone. So it's really important to feel connected and being able to relate to your therapist, being able to identify I guess similar values at times that would help. Yeah, sorry, did I answer your question?
I guess, I'm curious around this. We are talking about how vulnerable therapy can get, but this work in particular, I think, is going to bring up a lot for people, because for me, after my dad passed away, like I was on a trajectory in my life that seems like it was just going somewhere, and it was almost carrying me along with it. And the vulnerability came for me is that, like, I had no idea I how I would change my life. I knew that I needed to change it because I was burning out. I was really unwell. I was depressed at stages of my career. Um, I felt like I had disconnected from my friends because I was working all the time. And if I did spend time with them, I couldn't connect anymore because like it kind of felt like everything was like everyone was kind of laughing, and I was like I couldn't be in life. I kind of felt separated from life. So I was like, shit, like something needs to change. Like it's just not right. And my dad's passed away and I'm in this grief. But finding the answers really, really did take such a long time. And I think that's what's hard and what makes us kind of attached to what's comfortable and familiar. Because I was like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, or it's too hard. It's like, if I were to, I thought about it, like if I were to close the company, not only would it affect my life, it's going to affect 50 people in the company, then it's going to affect thousands of people. Like these people's, I mean, everyone's circumstances is very different, but there are a lot of reasons why sometimes change is very difficult, because there's emotions that we don't want to feel. I think that's what I'm getting at. It's like there's guilt. There's like, I'm going to disappoint this person if I do this. There's feelings of like inadequacy that we don't want to feel. So I imagine that so much of this work requires us to sit in a lot of really, really uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Just as you were saying that, Mary. I sort of remember. I think just going back to a bit to what I said earlier on today. When I had that sports injury, it took away my identity. I was full blown depressed. I hated everything, and I was a wreck. I was the worst version of myself, let's just say. And I sunk for 8 months. I didn't do anything. I cried every day. It was just horrible. And it was just so uncomfortable to just sit in the unknown, to not be able to do anything about my injury, not being able to work out, not being able to walk without pain. It was so hard. It was the most difficult thing I've ever experienced in my life. So yeah, like it's easier said than done, obviously, but when you are in that moment, sometimes you can't think rationally. You just think you just sort of feel like nothing's going your way. But then I think I really sunk for quite a lot of time, and I didn't seek help despite my family and some of my friends suggested that I do. It was just, for me, I think culturally, it was just too much for me to admit that I have to talk about this. I have to really work through it and sort of not be this person that I became. But then luckily, my surgeon gave me a second opinion, and then someone was able to operate on me and help me repair my injury. But the takeaway from that experience for me is just sometimes we really have to just let ourselves sit and wallow in the emotions and the difficulties of being in that situation. And If I really did listen to some of the suggestions made, I probably would have been able to heal a lot faster and be more mentally stable. But yeah, like I look back on it with a grateful heart. So
I mean, yeah, thank you for sharing that. It definitely made me think about my journey when I didn't have answers for quite a long time. I think it was a period of a few years that I didn't have the answers of how I could change my life. And sometimes sitting in those emotions, if anyone watched last week's session on trauma in the body, when we validate our emotions, when we allow ourselves to feel what we're actually feeling, even how difficult they may be, we are actually validating ourselves. You know, to reject our emotions is to reject ourselves. And so there is quite a lot of beauty in being able to find a pathway to be able to sit in uncomfortable emotions, because I think it personally, for me, I write about it a lot. I've written about it in my book. It's like it's a pathway to self-compassion, pathway back to yourself. Because otherwise, you know, we keep rejecting ourselves. How are we ever going to trust ourselves if we keep rejecting ourselves? If someone keeps rejecting you and saying, oh, you know, you can't feel what you're feeling, how are you going to? I don't want to hang out with them. It's a really, you know, I can't talk much more. I can't express how important it is for us to get support when we're not feeling good, because I think we try to rationalize it and think our way through difficult. Oh, get over this. And I was like, I'm a therapist. I was like beating myself up so bad because I was like I should know the answers to these questions, or I should be like better at self-soothing myself and not beating myself up. And it's like this double whammy of all the difficult things. There's this really good question, like, you know, finding ourselves more of a process and a journey rather than a destination? Will we ever find ourselves with constant change in our lives? Like, perfect question for these times. Ellie, what do you reckon?
Well, I was actually going to say, which kind of fits with this question, so it's good timing, but just the importance of timing, I think, is a major thing to dwell on as well. You know, I think we often think, you know, not that we have to hit rock bottom and kind of and then just jump up to finding ourselves. And, you know, I guess so to answer that question, it's more of a process, but there's an importance of timing as well, you know, thinking about the time in my life as well. Like if I'd had to go, okay, well, now that I'm at rock bottom, now that I'm sad, this then means point B is identity and I find it. And now I'm motivated and et cetera, et cetera. But also normalizing that sometimes it is just timing, which is not always the nice answer to give anyone. But hopefully having some validation, as you were saying, Mary, and validating those feelings themselves.
I definitely don't think it's a destination, because, man, if it was a destination, I would get myself there, because I'm very motivated to like get to a destination and like take something off a box, you know. But it's not. I mean, we change all of our lives. We're new jobs, new phases, new rites of passage. If you think about how much we change, there's no way that we can become static. And it's not even if anyone is interested in Buddhism and understanding impermanence, nothing in this life is going to be the same. And it's a really hard thing to wrap our heads around, but we are always constantly changing. And what I wanted for my career, I was like, I'm going to do this and blah, 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 I'm going to get in the media and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And then I got there and I was just like, what the beep? Like, this is not what I wanted at all, actually. And I had to unravel all of that and do all the parent work thing where I was like, no, I'm like being like rebellious and stuff. But actually what I was still doing was trying to please my parents at 40 years old. So I was like, okay, wow, this is, you know, this stuff will take you by surprise, this type of work, because sometimes we're like, oh, you know, it's just like, I'm getting close. And you're like, oh, I'm so far. And then sometimes you're so far, but you're actually much closer than you think. And it's a little bit of, you know, it's confusing at times. Eunice, did you have anything to share with that? Someone said, you know, thank you for sharing, because they have also had an injury as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just wanted to shout out to Gabriella. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely sort of, I wouldn't really say I handled my own injury very well, but just don't give up on hope. Try to sort of come to terms with what is something that you can do despite having this injury, and what are some of the steps that you can do to sort of recover gradually. So yeah, and I think I just wanted to top it off with one really good quote that I came across recently, Mary, and Ellie. There was one where it was, yeah, so confidence doesn't come when I have all the answers, but rather when I'm ready to ask myself questions such as, how can I live a more fulfilling life? How can I, yeah. So yeah, I really like that quote.
That's nice. I do like that. And, you know, someone asked us, do studies show a correlation between identity and stages of your life age? I'm guessing this question is like, are there periods in our lives where we're most likely to ask ourselves questions about our identity? I can imagine, yes, very much so.
I mean, at least from my experience, it's kind of, as I've echoed a few times, those big grief moments or those big loss moments, or that we're on a little track and then we go off. And that could be COVID or that could be multiple things. But I know, kind of just connecting with the research, something that's really interesting with post-traumatic growth, that I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that, but kind of as the name says, after a trauma, so that could be grief or loss as well. Various traumas, actually going through that, processing it and coming out the other side through growth. And part of that is identity. So I find that really interesting, kind of dealing with the grief and coming out stronger, per se. And part of that is a strengthened identity.
Post-traumatic growth, some of the, like, if anyone is going through a really, really difficult time, I really highly encourage you to look at the research behind post-traumatic growth, because there's a lot of information on post-traumatic stress, but that really outweighs, the research shows that more often than not, with this framework and understanding, people more often than not find more satisfaction in life, have better relationships, change their trajectory in life, rebuild the shattered beliefs that were blown apart when tragedy hit their lives into something, they build their lives into something more coherent and more beautiful. I did a lot of research on post-traumatic growth for my book, and it really helped me to feel so positive just reading some of the research papers and people in much more difficult circumstances than myself, cancer, HIV, war, other types of bereavement, and hearing them talk about what they had got out of the experience really helped me to get even some perspective. Also, Viktor Frankl's book, if anyone has read it, Man's Search for Meaning, not a really difficult read in terms of the content of Viktor Frankl's story, but wow, perspective and growth through like a very, very, very difficult situation. Laziness, procrastination, short-term gratification, avoidance. Let's discuss that. So I guess, this is the question around like drive as well, what gives us drive? How do we motivate ourselves? Like, is this just like some word that makes us feel bad about ourselves? How do we get it? Do we just like jump straight in, or do we have to, I don't know, wait to be motivated? Because I don't know about waiting to feel motivated, because it doesn't really work. Are we allowed to like just not feel motivated sometimes? Like, obviously everyone's situation is different, but what springs to mind when you hear these words?
I kind of go with a bit of a chicken or the egg situation, which is not really an answer, but kind of thinking about all this identity stuff that we've really dug into today. It's I'm not sure if we can have motivation without some of that identity, authentic living stuff going on. I guess when I explore this with clients, a lot of the time, not every single time, sometimes there's, some other stuff going on, but I'm lazy or I'm procrastinating or I'm not motivated. And obviously we can't just pick and choose every single thing we do. We still have to, we can't just not clean the kitchen, although I'd love to. But, some of it is it a should? Are you actually motivated? Or is it a should? Is it a thing that is past you that maybe we need to process? If not, different case. But I think that's always an interesting conversation to have too.
I mean, what comes up for me when I hear think of the word procrastination is the avoidance of, this is a very psychological way of looking at procrastination, because people are like, I'm just, not doing what I'm supposed to doing. But if you feel like you're about to procrastinate on a task, check in with your body and tell me how your body feels. Or ask yourself how your body is feeling. I can pretty much guarantee you, if you, focus in enough, you'll find that you're feeling quite uncomfortable in your body. And that is the feeling that you're trying to avoid. So feelings, those types of sensations, this is often what is behind us not doing what we want to do, because we're trying to get rid of those sensations. So again, we could drink a glass of wine, kind of get rid of those sensations. They come back later. But if we learn how to sit with those uncomfortable sensations within our body, anyone who's creative or dabbles in creativity, in this audience knows that if you want to finish anything or get a piece of creative work done, you have to sit in some discomfort, and being able to attune to your body is pretty key in this. So that's a bit of a practical tool from me. Eunice, what do you think when you hear laziness, procrastination, short-term gratification, avoidance? What drives us? Like, that's a hard question that we've been asked, but we'll give it a crack, because I don't know the question. But
Let's see. When I think about, first of all, motivation, like for me, what comes up is, what drives me, what gives me fulfillment, what makes me feel alive, and also what are some of the things that make you want to be better. Sort of when someone starts a company, they have a vision. It's sort of like their why. Why are they doing this? Not just to solve a problem, but usually how does their product or their service relate to their personal story. And yeah, like when you do ask yourself, why do you want to be better? What's your vision? Don't sort of think about the limitations. Don't think about the financial constraints, the societal constraints, the culture, and all that stuff. Just put that on your vision board. Like no limits. What makes you want to be better? So that's motivation for me. And something that comes to mind when people say, oh, I procrastinate, I can't get this thing done. A lot of reasons actually sit behind that. As you said, some of the things that came up with a recent client of mine is perfectionistic. So having a perfectionist mindset, it can be very paralyzing, because they feel like they have to make sure they get everything right before they get started, or they have to really wait until the ultimate deadline to be really motivated by the pressure. So yeah, like perfectionism, sort of maybe it's like the fear of uncertainty, what could happen. And even not knowing, that's a huge one, even for me personally. The other day I was just learning how to code JavaScript, and I remember I sat there, I was like,
Casual.
how the hell do I code? I sat there in 5 minutes, I was like, I couldn't get the answers right. So yeah, sometimes it's about just really sitting with that, like, okay, like, look, I'm new at this. I may not be good at it right away. I may suck for a bit, but I'm giving it a go. So I think that's all we can ask ourselves to do.
My question is why?
Sorry?
My question is why? Why JavaScript?
I was watching a Netflix show called Startup, and then like it's central towards this chick who is so smart, she can code everything. So I was just like, what? I've always been curious about coding, so why not give it a shot? And it was quite cool.
I think and we joke about the question why, but the question why needs to be a very important question that we ask ourselves. If we don't ask ourselves why enough, why am I doing this? Why do I check my phone when I wake up in the morning? Why do I get into social media? Why have I stayed back late 3 or 4 or 5 times? Why am I in this relationship? I don't ask myself that all the time. My partner's just like, duh. But you know, like, because we get into comfortable routines. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why, you know, to break some of that is really important, because it cuts to not what. Sometimes we get obsessed with what am I going to do? What am I going to do? It's like, well, why? Like, what it's maybe the values underneath that would drive us and make what we do kind of intimately connected to something that is uniquely us in some way. I think we've got lots of questions, so let's see. I'm keen to understand if impermanence means that we're constantly changing. How do you land on your identity, or is it a case of constant identity? I think we've kind of answered that it's not a destination. It is constantly evolving, but there are periods where I think all those things are, we're always experimenting. That's what I think. I think we're afraid to experiment. I think we're afraid to use our imagination, because at some point in our lives, someone told us we had to figure it out. I think it was somewhere in year 7. Maybe for me, it was when my parents told me when I was probably born that I was going to be a doctor. And it was like self-determined for me. So I think at some point in our lives, I do notice that we are afraid to change our minds. I see uni students who are afraid because they chose business. Now they're afraid to go and study architecture. 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old people not happy doing what they're doing anymore, was maybe happy or maybe really unhappy for all of their careers. But sometimes people are happy and then they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And we're afraid to change. And it's exploring what's underneath that really brings us closer to ourselves. It really brings us closer to other people, because if we talk about it, there's a lot of people on this who had registered for this conversation. A lot of people are asking themselves, why? And I think it's nice for us to give people the courage to maybe ask themselves the question, you know, to explore, to get things wrong.
I wonder if that also takes pressure off too. I mean, just as I'm listening, I'm like, I'm just exploring. And, you know, it's not this huge, and your likelihood of finding things and finding identity is so much higher through exploration. But it also, just as I'm sitting here, I'm like, I can explore, I can be open. I don't have to, like, it seems like a very different narrative to, I need to figure out my identity, what's going on, I need to nail it down. Rather than, like, I can explore, that feels a lot more achievable and doable.
Do you guys have any authors, studies that we would recommend people to start with? Books that you guys read? Well, you know, we can put this out.
Can I grab 1 or 2? I'll be right back.
Yes.
Oh, physical copies.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
How do we grieve a loss of identity and selves in a healthy way? I think going back to this topic of grief is actually really interesting and important. Like Ellie, how are you helping your clients work through this loss of identity and or grief?
Well, I suppose in a grief sense, once kind of identify what grieving, letting go of, what's the hardest to let go of, once you've kind of identified some of that stuff, which is often the hardest part. But I like to use an oscillating model, which is just a fancy way of saying grieving the old and kind of beginning the new. And so I suppose when we talk about healthy and healthy grief, kind of dancing between this. Some days it will look like trying a new thing, but some days it'll look like feeling the feels. And kind of making sure that you're dancing, not just in one, not just jumping to trying everything new all of a sudden, but also, you know, in balance, I suppose.
So what you're talking about is a kind of 2-factor model of grief, where feeling the feels is really important, but if we feel the feels too much, we can often collapse into the feels. But then we also kind of get out and like do the normal things that we do, go to work, see our friends, all of that kind of stuff. You know, maybe even distract ourselves a little bit, because that's okay sometimes to have a coping mechanism. But it's like the being able to move between those two states is what can help people just not stay in one state for too long, because they're both important, right? Personally, for me, you know, and I've spoken about this in the last session as well, is music. I think when it's difficult, maybe you don't align. Like I used to journal, and now I like don't journal anymore. Like I used to give that as an exercise quite a lot, and I'm like, I just don't. I'm not as aligned to it as I used to be. Then music, like I don't have to try to get my thoughts out. It's almost like the feelings are sort of pulled out of me. So this is, you know, I really recommend a conscious listening to music. I'll send, you know, a big playlist in the wrap email that people can use to help process. We've got this person can come to a listen up. We've got a listen up coming up in a couple of weeks, where you're encouraged to sit and process your emotions, you know, with headphones on. It's actually a very pleasurable experience as well, very cathartic. You know, and I think the biggest thing for me around processing grief is talking about it, and allowing personally for me to be vulnerable with others, to let other people see me vulnerable, and share and connect in that way. Because I think with grief we can't do life alone in general, but particularly with grief, when it tends to kind of close out, like, so I kind of put blinkers on our eyes and makes everything like, oh, you know, shame does it as well. I think we need to be with others, and to really talk about our experiences. Eunice, you had some books for us.
Oh, yes. So Big Magic, that one talks about creative living. It identifies a lot of like some of our fears and doubts. Very good. I'm a few chapters in. The Defining Decade, recommended by one of my best friends. It's sort of 30 is the new 20 in a sense. I don't remember what I took away from because it was a long time ago, but it was a really good one. Defining Decade by Meg J. And so two more, which is Atomic Habits, my favorite one. It has a lot to do with identity and motivation as well, I think, which ties in beautifully with our workshop today.
Yeah, that book.
And then, yeah, best one. And then finally, I recently got this, I haven't started, but it says Start with Why. Yeah, and I mean, I'd love to sort of, it's by Simon Sinek. Yeah.
Yeah, so he, you know, for those that maybe, I know Simon Sinek has like a really good TED talk. I think it's about 10 minutes, and he talks about why, and he talks about, you know, he's going to talk about it much more succinctly than I am, so I'm not even going to try to explain what the talk is about, actually. But check that out. So someone said, finding out what emotions motivates us is interesting too. For me, it has been fear, which is not sustainable. Fear of failure, fear of disappointing others. Is there a way to change that and move into a more positive feeling when it comes to drive and motivation? I think that's a really, really good question. And I would go really deep with that personally and look at, when did that start? You know, when did fear start being a motivator? And I think to the person who wrote that question, it's very common. This, you're 100% not alone on that journey, but I would be very, very curious to find out consciously and subconsciously where that all began, because somehow it paid off. You know, Eunice, you said before, everything that we do is kind of motivated. We kind of get some benefit out of it. So obviously it's been working out for you. For me, same. Fear ruled my whole life. Fear of disappointing my parents, all of that kind of stuff. It was like maybe really successful at one point in my life. I was like, yeah, I'm killing it. But then I was killing myself at the same time. And I had to understand where that actually came from. And the fear for me really was like that I was not enough. I was going to be found out that I was not enough, and I had to do a lot of healing around that beginning for me, those moments in my life where I had to, be more and like come into that energy and use that as a motivator, instead of, because I wasn't taught that how to create or be in life from a positive. And I had to kind of teach myself to be able to be motivated from a different place, from a place of being more connected to myself. And so to that person, there is a big transition between it's like using a different type of fuel for your car. It's like, you've been fueling yourself in this way for a really, really long time. And the transition to a different type of fuel takes time, because in the meantime, you may have to not be super motivated. Maybe you're not going to be kicking as many goals and pleasing all the people, and you're going to have to potentially disappoint some people, feel like you're not good enough, feel like you're a failure. But all of that, you can also feel those feels and find a way to accompany yourself through those emotions, where you can be like, I can feel these feels, I know where they come from, but it's not going to stop me, and it's not going to keep motivating me to like people please or do this thing for others or whatever. And I think that's really, really powerful. Do you guys have anything to add to this journey for someone, how they might be able to change from a fear-based motivation to a more positive motivation?
I do have, oh, sorry. No, you go.
You go.
You go.
Oh, you. Okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
I guess just, you said it beautifully, Mary, but I suppose just being, oh my God, I'm going to use curious again. Curious around the stories. And I think, kind of harking back to what I was saying at the very, very beginning about the stories that were running my life, and they were all from fear. And I suppose, for myself, I got to a point where I was living the fear story from my family and from maybe me when I was younger, and kind of just really going back to what you were saying, Mary, where did that start and where has it continued? I suppose in that process, as you beautifully said.
Yeah.
It's often really, really hard, and kind of going back to what we're saying, some of this is really, it's hard. It's not always positive, fun stuff to do. So also normalizing that for yourself.
Eunice, do you have anything to add to that, or did we say it?
Yeah. I guess just to top it off with what both you, Mary, and Ellie have said, I think something that comes to mind when us being motivated by fear is that for me personally, it sounds like it comes down to feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like you should be a certain way, as Ellie has beautifully put it. So something that I like to do in sort of really changing that narrative is, really reframing the way that you think. It's like, instead of being like, okay, I have to do this because I don't want to disappoint this person, think about, okay, if I do this, what can I benefit from? Like, what would it give me? What are some of the insights that would give me if I were to do this thing? So sort of switching from externally motivated to sort of being internally motivated, I think, which ties into identity and motivation again, which is, what are some things that have helped you in the past to be motivated instead of just, fear? What are some of the tips or styles that can help you to keep you motivated? I don't know, like kind words of affirmation, maybe doing, like having those like cliche quotes. Like I had this one that says never ever ever give up during year 11 and 12. I looked at that every single day. So that's that's something that's helped me. That's my take.
I think there's a way that we could also use fear in an interesting way to motivate us in the positive direction. And it's like thinking, if I continue down this pathway, pleasing others, living in a fear of what's not sustainable, fear of failure, all of that kind of stuff, and basically living our lives not for ourselves but for others. What is your life going to look like in 5 years' time? Like, how are you going to feel? Who's going to be around you? You know, it's like, holy shit, not great. What's it going to be like in 10 years' time? You know, and then again, me thinking about looking back on our lives at the end of our lives. Is this something where we're going to be like, yeah, you know, it was so great. Like everyone was pleased everyone in my life. Everyone was like, yay. You know what? I feel like sometimes we can't even please everyone. It just becomes extremely exhausting and it ends up catching up with us anyway. That's what I feel in the physical body. So, you know, underneath a lot of it for me is being able to sit again with uncomfortable emotions of disappointing someone, of saying, no, I don't want to do that, of learning how to find your voice and express yourself and communicate, you know, going, you know, really discovering what you want to prioritize, like creating a vision. I know it sounds like really like, oh, create a vision, put up a, I don't know, cut some piece, you know, picture. It's not like creating a vision board kind of thing, but there is a time along this journey. It's not always straight away, where it is important to motivate ourselves through an imagined and possible future. And there's a lot of research behind this in positive psychology. It's called prospection, and how that motivates us to move forward in our lives. So often if we don't have a vision of the future, that's how we can get depressed. That's why it was really difficult for us over the past few years in the pandemic, because nobody knew. We couldn't make plans. We couldn't see our friends. We couldn't plan holidays. We couldn't do all of that kind of stuff. And when I'm working with people who are depressed, it's often very clear, like 99% of the time, they can't see their future. And so we don't want to like kind of create this fake future and try to like, you know, have this toxic positivity. But there does come a time on the therapeutic journey where you build a vision that is has a basis of your values, rather than like, I don't know, pictures of the Caribbean and like a big giant house and stuff that maybe your parents want you to have, or maybe your friends want you to have. So it's really, you know, you have to unravel the why and the, you know, why you have done the things that you have done. I think there's another, as well as understanding why we may feel stuck, focusing on the now by creating small positive emotions throughout the day mindfully to create an upward spiral. Positive emotions would increase motivation. So yeah, I think, Eunice, I mean, you said it like a while ago, but there is something to be said about small steps. You know, it's not exciting to like sometimes think about the small actionable things that we can do, but when we're looking at a mountain that seems unclimbable, sometimes the thing that I have to just ask myself is like, literally, what is the next step? And like, can I just imagine myself doing that step, feeling positive about it, giving myself like a bit of a pat on the back, instead of having this list of 50 things that I haven't done and then just feeling crap at the end of the day for not getting through any of them. Like, you know, what is that role of that plan that we need to have, and how do you give that to your, how do you frame that for your clients?
Again, it links to Atomic Habits, which is the book that I read that I recommended earlier that changed my life. I think the wisdom that I gained from that book with answering this question is that I think we're in this society where we're just too focused on the quick success, you know, instant gratification, quick money, like whatever, that we forget a really important part, which Atomic Habits talks about, is, you know, instead of focusing on the outcome, say, you know, you want to climb Mount Everest or whatever, what does that, the person who has climbed Mount Everest have done? You know, what is their mindset like? How do they, you know, get through so many, you know, such a long time to get up to the mountain? So rather than focusing on outcomes, focus on an identity. And when you sort of look at it in the long term, you know, the little steps matters, because it compounds into a lot of small percentages of improvement in a year's time. So don't really sort of look at the small things as, oh, you know what, like, you know, so many people have done it better than me, that doesn't even matter, it's so tiny. It's those little moments, those mini improvements, that is so crucial, because once you do start to see results, which is gradually, it's spectacular. Just for example, finishing a piece to sort of finish the workshop today would be, think back to 1 year ago or 2 years ago. What were you like? What were some of the traits that, just who were you personally? What are the changes and differences that you noticed within yourself, compared to now, 2022? Because I promise you that it's huge. Yeah.
And while we're on exercises, I mean, Ellie, what you have something that you give to your clients around these topics of identity and motivation. I think it's something that we can share with our audiences, as well as, in the wrap email that comes up.
Yeah, I mean, kind of just, sorry, I'm taking the conversation a little bit backwards, but just something just kind of popped into my head while you were talking, Eunice. I'm talking about the little bits. I also feel like with confidence, kind of that is extremely similar with the confidence piece, and these big things of motivation, identity, confidence, and it's not so much the big mountain, but it is that those small steps over time. But yes, the exercise. So I find it really useful. I mean, depending on how creative people are, depending on how visual they are, but a lot of my clients are very, very visual people. So usually I like to have a bit of a think about what words come up for people with identity, which if you have a look at the exercise when you get it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Hopefully it'll land a bit more. But just being curious, and they're questions that we've already asked today. So kind of around what are the shoulds, what is the why, what's motivating me or not motivating me, and just really unraveling. And of course, if you need extra support doing that, definitely seek it. But it sometimes helps just asking those questions and opening the gate. So that the resource that I usually give clients helps put it in a visual, so you can even just step back and go, whoa, okay, there's a lot of doing here. Like maybe there's a lot of, I'm a parent, I'm a friend, I'm this, I'm that, but there's not much me in there. So having that visual often helps to go, no wonder I'm not motivated to go for a run at 6 a.m. It kind of sometimes, hopefully, that reflection comes from stepping back and being like, some of this makes sense, and starting to walk through it.
Totally, because I mean, even in a very simple way, we can look at different areas of our lives. For example, we can rate it. We can do a holistic rating. Write all these different areas of your life: your health, spiritual health, your physical health, your family, your friends, love, career, creativity, all these things. And you can give yourself a score. Like, where do I think I'm kind of sitting now from 0 to 10? How happy am I with, or satisfied am I? 0, I'm not satisfied. 10, I'm really satisfied. And then make another column. Where would I like to be? Why? Because sometimes we don't have to be 10 out of 10 in everything in our lives at all. Like, why? And what maybe might change that one point, maybe in a different direction. That if we were, a 6 in our relationships or friendships, where we want to become a 9, but what would take it from a 6 to a 7? So we can start to break that down and make it a little bit more concrete, because I think it's very easy for us to say, my life is not where it's at, but then it can feel a little bit murky. I think we're hitting these questions of identity, these questions of motivation, also really seem to be talking a lot about confidence. Do you guys get asked, like, how do I improve my confidence? How do I, feel better about myself? Because this is part and parcel of this journey. Like, I know it's a very big question, but how do we even begin to understand that, what would help us feel more confident within ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I almost, like, kind of reflecting on different experiences, it often is so embedded in that identity stuff, because the likelihood of when you're feeling lost with identity, confidence goes. And it's not that when you have flawed identity, you always have solid confidence, but it does seem to be very common that both those things go at once, particularly like, who am I? How can I trust myself? And let self-trust and intuition and whatever was there before being now lost and having to find that again. But I guess I usually find that going through part of this identity stuff and the practices of it, kind of going back to what Eunice was saying with the small steps over time, which often doesn't seem like much as day by day, but figuring out those things as we go over time usually sees confidence increase, because you're like, actually, I've seen that I can do this, and it's through the experiential, which I think often isn't our instinct. I mean, of course, there's great value in thoughts and being conscious of thoughts and stories, but it can be very experiential as well.
I find confidence is a really interesting word in itself, because it's like, how do we even define confidence? What does it mean to you? Does it mean that you're talking more? Or, I think confidence is this, for me, it's a bit more internal about being able, I find these two topics of features, confidence and trust within myself, kind of related. It makes it easier for me to grapple with, because sometimes confidence, you just think, oh, that person who's like standing and talking and being like, yay, really confident. But actually, it's like, being confident doesn't necessarily have to do with how you command a crowd necessarily, but can be a very quiet inner knowing and a trusting within oneself, which I think, to make it very practical, confidence can come from when you choose to do things that are aligned with your, kind of like within your boundaries. So, when you don't put yourself in situations that are unsafe for you, where you make the right choices, you gain an inner trust and an inner confidence in, like, I'm not going to put myself in that situation. I'm going to put myself in that situation because it's out of love for myself, out of respect for myself, from a place of worth and value, rather than I'm leaving myself to please others, to get approval, to get validation. Eunice, how do you unravel, this topic of confidence in a few minutes?
Just tying back, extending what you said, Mary. I think rather than seeking the approval of other people, switch it around. How can I get approval for myself? What are some of the things that I would want to do that makes me believe in myself more? It's like, oh wow, like I didn't know I can actually do this. I didn't know I can actually live up to my potential in this way. So yeah, I've also got some questions in an exercise that could be sent to you guys later that has a lot of that, would sort of ask you about some of your strengths, interests, like if some of the factors that's holding you back. And also there is this sort of cliche 3-step plan thing that I've got, which is what is some of the things that you want to do, list them out and then write them down. What does it look like in practice? And then the action stage, which is what's the first step or the first thing that you need to know to get to do it. And then yeah, that's what I would say.
And what is holding you back?
Yes. me
What are the obstacles and how are you going to deal with them when they come up? Because it's like a pretty important part of that journey, right?
Definitely.
I think we've tackled a lot of stuff. We've tackled not only what is identity and how it's connected to motivation and confidence, but where our shoulds come from, grief, loss. It isn't necessarily a pretty journey, is it? But I think it's very worthwhile. I think it's what actually grounds us into an understanding of, at the core of us, what could make our soul sing versus living our lives for others or sleepwalking through our lives. I wanted to kind of wrap tonight by saying that it's really important that anyone on this journey who's going through grief or loss or anxiety or depression or feeling that kind of collective heaviness that's kind of there for all of us at this moment. Like, it's really important, I think, first and foremost, that you are not alone with it. I think that's the hugest thing. Like, if you take anything away, like, you can forget about our exercises and our questions, and instead reach out to someone, send a text, say, this is what's burdening my heart. This is how my heart is feeling at the moment. I think connection is ultimately what we need, that allows us to have the courage and the strength to maybe even ask ourselves some of these questions, because it can be scary to even go down this path. So Eunice and Ellie, thank you so much for your wisdom today, for your tools, your tips, your strategies, your personal stories as well. Like, I really appreciate the vulnerability that's come through. For everyone that's watching today, thank you so much for coming and being a part of the community. If you do want to watch next week's, it is on Death and New Beginnings, which is all about how you can find your way to more purpose, more meaning in your life, and how the kind of lens of death can really bring that to the forefront. I'd like to just also announce that in a few weeks' time, in March 15, 16, and 17, we have 3 free Listen Up sessions. For those that don't know what Listen Up is, it's basically a contemporary sound bath. You can do it from the comfort of your own home. You just need a laptop, headphones, somewhere to lie down, get comfy. It's like a music journey that myself and Indigo's music director, Rich Lucano, we've been refining this process for the last 5 years. We love it. It's very, very good for your mental health. It's also really, really good music. So it's not whale sounds and singing bowls. And so it's cool if you're into that stuff, but it's contemporary music, a lot of ambient. There might be some original music from Rich. It's free. Usually it's not. It's the most popular event at Indigo, and we're doing a bit of research. So all we ask for a little bit of exchange is that you fill out a short survey at the end, so we can understand how Listen Up and its experience is beneficial to you and developing things like self-compassion and self-reliance. Thank you so much for everyone who's saying thank you. Yes, maybe podcast series next. Oh my gosh, because I need more work to do, right?
You do.
Yeah, please, if you haven't watched the last couple of episodes and you are interested in trauma in the body, how to get unstuck in life, how to find out what beliefs are holding you back, they're all up on our YouTube channel. We've also spoken about, what are we doing the first one? Relationships. Oh my gosh, huge topic. Whether you're in a romantic relationship or not, we speak to our relationship specialists and our resident couples counselor, Amanda. So, go back and watch those. Those are really incredible too. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion with us. We've been very nervous, but we've also put ourselves out there.
Yes.
And we hope to see you guys next week or at Listen Up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Eunice. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.